to EC 5509. I had to look at that to remember. So this session is enhancing workplace mobility and BYOD with the VMware Global Secure Workplace. The title outside is the original title. This is the enhanced title. I'd like to introduce one of my members here, Stephen Porter from Trenrenko, who will be interchanging in and out with me throughout the session. And a little bit about myself. My name is Marilyn, Basanta, and I work for the end user computing group in the solutions team as a solutions architect. And we'll go ahead and start. So what is the secure mobile workspace? I'm sure you guys have heard maybe from last year some of the EUC solutions. This one is kind of the update to the mobile secure desktop, or now the mobile secure workspace. And that will kind of hint at what we've added in a few components. We're going to quickly cover all these topics here and go ahead and bring in the solution for you. So as you know, these solutions kind of came about because we wanted to have a very prescriptive and defined way for is the internal or your external trusted network. So in order to determine where the connections are coming in from the end user, we have our layer 7 load balancer. And these fit in with multiple different partners. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Right. Now the load balancer determines where the incoming connections are directed. And it knows where to route these connections to the appropriate places. Remember, we want to set up a global namespace for these. Right. So the first place that the load balancer will hit will be the security server, which will then route to your internal connection managers. We have our common infrastructure pieces, such as the AD, SSO if you'd like, your certificate authority if you have that set up, radius. We want a file and print server which handles all our open apps and persona data. Backup is also a portion of the solution if you'd like to have it set up. And here we kind of fit the common vSphere portions such as vCenter, vCNS, or now NSX. vCops for monitoring, AV, which lends itself greatly to Trenrenko. And in this solution that we're adding is Trenrenko mobile security, and we'll talk about how that fits in to enhance some of the security for our devices. And of course, Horizon Workspace. This is a new piece of validation that we've done from last year to this year. And just to wrap it up, the load balancer pointing to the gateway view. Right? And then of course at the bottom we have our different desktops. As I said, this solution lends itself to different users and workloads, so that will depend on how you want to set this up for your infrastructure. Right? And of course, the solution has 3 key components, the first one being mobility, the second one being security, and the third one being user experience. So we want to make sure everything's tuned so the user has the best possible experience with you and workspace. All right. So I want to go ahead and cover some top-level things that you want to consider as you design and do this architecture. First is your TCP and IP schema, VLANs, routing, and name resolution. It's imperative that you guys define and understand an appropriate IP and routing schema for the solution prior to breaking any ground in implementation. This is especially important to consider when you're designing your internal and external networks and you're setting up your components with your load balancer. You want to make sure you have everything planned and everything set up. The next component are all the different AD requirements, especially for workspace. It has a few requirements, and of course how you're going to set up your view. And if this site, you have multiple sites, you want to make sure you set up your different forests or sub-child domains. The next thing to consider are make sure you have your dedicated DMZ so you can route your users appropriately. And these can also apply to your mobile devices and we'll talk about that. And remember to plan for your redundant configurations. Make sure you're going to set up your affinity rules and with the vSphere items that you have. You have enough nodes, enough cluster, Remember that your AD directory structure should be evaluated before you implement our products. You want to make sure that there could be security requirements, as I mentioned, that may have you to have either a trusted child domain or not. You want to make, do you have enough resources? Do you have redundant AD DCs for your different sites? And lastly, you want to make sure that you think about your public key infrastructure, especially if you're going to deploy Microsoft Enterprise CA. This is, I think, one of the biggest places. Certificates are always a pain point, especially with vCenter and vSphere. You want to make sure that you have everything kind of ready, so that when you get to view, you have your certificates ready, and you get to workplace, your certificates all ready to go. Let's talk a little bit about Radius integration with the product. As you know, you have a lot of great choice and flexibility with the different Radius partners. There's also the RSA Secure ID. Some of these partners could be Active Identity, Symantec, NFV. So you have a lot of choices. In our design, we have given some instructions on how to connect with View and some tips and tricks in our design guide. And of course, it's meant to be modular and you can fit in with any of your choices that you need. In our particular solution, we set up Microsoft Radius, so there are more detailed instructions on how to set that up with View. And it's fully documented. Just little screenshots of the configuration for you. By having persona management in our design, we use stateless desktops, and you have to make sure you resize our SIF shares accordingly to the number of users. And also replication of the SIF shares in case your environment goes down. We can make sure we can restore all of our users very quickly and seamlessly. You want to make sure you test out your profile and tune your balance folder redirection so the data goes to the right places. And then there's also ThinApps. If you're going to implement ThinApps, this usually will be on the same file print server, or it could be on a different file print server. But you want to make sure that you set up a proper application cache, and you're using actually, cache to, so all this gets preloaded into the desktop so the user has a better user experience. And which I might talk about is they will touch upon later. To make sure that if you're going to have your desktops scan with AVs, which is the endpoint, make sure to size that and not to properly size that also with the eye. And actually, that's a good story. So, as part of my role as one of the solutions architects, we also have some demo environments, and we implemented our virtual distributed systems, and we were using a hosting provider that we don't get to control, and we didn't do properly. It is not eliminated, so you will have to take that into account on a per host basis.
Endpoint APIs is one of the key elements that we focus on. But in talking about supporting an end-user environment, it's all about the dynamic nature of them. So whilst the endpoint API gives us potentially higher density, by taking that security task out of the individual VMs and running virtual clients off to the side, we can drive better end-user experience, we can drive better utilization, so you can get more servers, more VDI sessions onto a particular platform. If it's not in lockstep with vCenter and able to understand when a machine starts, stops, or moves, then some of that efficiency is lost. So in our implementation, we worked with VMware on developing the endpoint APIs. Not only are we taking advantage of the virtual clients, but we're also linking in with vCenter so that we can make management of your end-user computing environment much easier. So as a VDI session starts, we're able to secure it very efficiently and very quickly. So the virtual appliance is always up to date, and it's always got the current pattern files. So one of the important things about looking at end-user computing, the workspace, and the View deployments is to think about transforming the way that you actually deliver security. If you take the traditional approach where you put security inside the individual VMs or inside the servers, then potentially you're going to be inhibiting yourself. So in this model, we're able to support not only the antivirus piece, which is normally the entry states, but we're also able to extend it and provide other capabilities. So things like file integrity allows us to guarantee the VM that we're using for this VDI session or for this particular server hasn't been changed in any way. We're able to support things like virtual patching so that we can eliminate some of the challenges that you might have around Patch Tuesday every month from Microsoft, or the Adobe pop-ups, and the other Java pop-ups that you get in a desktop environment or you get in a server environment. So the key things that we've managed to do and we've built into the mobile secure reference architecture with the EUC team, and now we're extending in the mobile reference architecture, is to drive efficiencies on the density side, to enable less resource to be consumed by a particular task, which gives a better user experience. But from your perspective as people operating this environment, it's about the manageability and the fact that we can address the security challenges. So with that, I'd like to hand back over to Marilyn, who's going to talk about more of the workspace capabilities.
So just as a quick poll, how many have actually deployed Horizon Workspace and used it extensively? Not too many. Okay. Is everyone familiar with all the capabilities of Workspace? Either way, I'll go through. So as you know, Workspace is our real entry point to the end user computing experience. From Workspace, you can have one location where you can get access to everything. Get access to your data, access to your apps, and access to your virtual desktops. So the Workspace VM is comprised of multiple different components. So when you're deploying it in your environment, there are very different considerations from your typical view considerations that you have to think about. So this is what is exciting to me because it's brand new, and it was interesting to figure out all the pain points and things that we should consider, so that way you don't have to follow the same headaches I get internally. So it's composed of 5 different VMs: the configurator VA, connector VA, gateway VA, service VA, and data VA. So some of it lends itself to be self-explanatory. The data VA being handling all the Horizon data. Let's go ahead and break that up. The configurator VA is really just used. It's a central wizard UI. So when you deploy Workspace, you do some configurations on the VM, and then it'll bring you to this UI wizard where you'll set up more specific user information, quota, policies, and those type of things. So that's what the configurator VA does. The connector VA is really the glue for everything, for, as you can see, for AD, for your RSA, for syncing everything across the entire product. The gateway VA is what we'll talk about later about load balancing. This is what, it doesn't get exposed out, but it's what you actually route all the requests going to the appropriate services. All right. The service VA is really what handles the policies and the administrative portions of Workspace entitlements, so it's kind of like the connection manager for Workspace. And as I mentioned, the data VA actually is where you store the files. You can manage your preview server if you would like to, and all the other policies for sharing. So here, one good example is you go to the data VA. If something happens where a user didn't get deleted correctly, this is where you go and do these type of cleanup commands. So as I mentioned, there are multiple little tips that I'd like to really share about Workspace. You want to make sure everything for DNS is set up properly before you deploy, because it will definitely fail and not deploy. And a lot of the time you'll have to go back, completely remove it, and redeploy just to retrigger that portion. So it's something you definitely want to consider. Make sure everything can be resolvable across your entire network. So for the gateway VA, separate from the load balancing setup, which we'll talk about, you want to make sure you think about your split brain DNS settings. What we typically do is we set up, you have your external URL, in our case, VMware2013.com, and from there, internally we have it set to point back to the gateway VA. Another tip, especially with Horizon 1.5, is to have all of your signed certificates, as we recommend you use a proper certificate for production environments. You want to make sure that the entire chain is exported. And this is definitely something that I see come up often with customers. In the administrative guide, it gives you a sample on every particular section and order for the certificate, so make sure that matches. It's definitely causes some headaches. Separately, you have to make sure you have a Horizon admin account set up in your AD. This is what really takes advantage of where you set up all your policies and such. And you want to make sure if you're going to link, View with Workspace, if you're going to have users sharing different pools, you want to think about how you're going to structure your groups so everything gets synced properly. And it's something you guys may want to be on the lookout for, as we possibly going to help release something that will help further sync View and Workspace together in terms of a self-registration template, which is something that our group's been working on and that will be used with our demo environment that we have for our field. We have the appropriate thin packages set up in a repository on your file and server for Workspace. One big thing that I always see come up is in Workspace, where you have access to your desktop portion. If you're logged into Workspace, people are typically logged into Workspace for a long time, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, I'd like to click to my desktop. If you don't have the global timeout set correctly in View, which defaults to 15 minutes, that user will click on the desktop, and then they'll say, oh, why did this SSO me into my desktop? And that is typical with the timeout. So you make sure you use the timeout to whatever length of time you feel appropriate for your security profile, and then the users will have a better user experience or know that they have to sign back in if they want to have SSO access to their desktop. All right, and preview strategy. As you know, in Workspace, when you go to the web UI, you can do document preview. You can use LibreOffice, which is open source, or if you want to have a Microsoft Preview server, again, that's something you set up on the data VA. Another thing to think about when you are connecting with View, you want to make sure that in Horizon must have a reverse proxy set up in order for it to link it with Horizon Workspace. It is not supported to put your Horizon Gateway VA in your DMZ. It's definitely not supported. The Gateway VA also, of course, can't be, again, by not being split, can't be split. Since this is what actually routes all the information, you want to make sure it's very important that you route everything properly. You don't want to expose the Gateway VA since it's so critical to Workspace, you might have security holes. So that's the biggest recommendation here. And this slide kind of shows out if you're scaling Workspace for multiple users and you need multiple Gateway VAs, how you'd scale it. This just gives a little preview on how you'd scale it out, but overall, make sure you have your load balancing set up correctly to route properly. So I know this is not talked about a lot in Europe, but with Horizon Workspace 1.5, we introduced the the Horizon Switch, the mobile virtualization platform. The reason I'm touching upon it here today is just because it's a very interesting way that VMware is doing this on Android. As you know, certain devices are now enabled and they're VMware ready. And if you have this component enabled in Workspace, you can then enroll these type of phones, Android phones, into your environment. And you can have two separate Android environments, your personal and your virtual corporate. And from there, you can push out the applications for Android exactly as they are, and you can make sure everything is separate on the device. It is, an actual virtualized Android experience. With this, we support the latest version of Android, which is Jelly Bean 4.2. Everything on the phone is a native experience. The OpenGL drivers are virtualized, so you can still play Angry Birds on your virtualized corporate phone, but I'm sure your corporate policy might note that down. We have an enhanced Horizon mail app that this is both available for the virtual phone and for your Android phone for your end users, which you guys should take a look at. That's on the Play Store. And the whole reason I'm bringing this up is here. Sorry, before I jump to that, I'll say how it works. I actually recently just got one of these phones for myself, which is really fun to play with. I'm actually maybe one of the only people in my team who actually still uses an Android phone. Everyone else loves their iPhone. I've always been an Android girl. So the way it works is that I go out and buy myself a device that happens to be VMware ready. I know that my company has Horizon Workspace Mobile enabled. So what I would do is that I'd go to the Play Store and download the Horizon VMware Switch app. And And this app actually is very smart, or your phone's very smart. It only shows you the app if your phone's ready to actually be capable. So the main reason I wanted to talk about it here in Europe is that now Sony and these upcoming versions of phones will be released with VMware ready technology without being carrier specific. So it could work with any carrier in Europe as long as the phone's capable of operating. And these users will be able to take advantage of Horizon Switch in your environments. Right, so now, why would we?
So you've got a complete kind of route there of research, attacking an individual, traversing the network inside the environment, finding the information that we're looking for, and then extracting that information through the command control center. And the mobile and the servers play an important part of that journey. So it's a bit of an eye chart, and if you look at me, I think you'll realise that I started over on the left-hand side. My first experience of computing was a teletype terminal with an acoustic coupler. I'm looking for somebody of a similar age. Anybody? Acoustic couplers, anybody? Yeah. Of different platforms that we have to address and have to consider. The key one is still Android. So I'm sure if we took a straw poll, the bulk of you would be Android or iOS. Any Windows mobile? Yay! That there would be 130,000 pieces of malware for Android. Unfortunately, we got it wrong. And this year it's got even worse. So these numbers and the gaps between the prediction and the reality is just growing. So in thinking about your use of workspace, your use of end-user computing, you've got to consider that the bad guys are one step. And we have to understand the differences between the different platforms. So whilst there's a malware out there, emulate different applications. And we've seen Angry Birds with a whole variety of different spellings. So if you don't check the vendor, or you don't check the spelling of the app, you could be downloading either a copied or mimicked version of the application, or a compromised one.